Grace and peace to you in the name of God the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. One of the things that many households and churches do during Advent is display nativity scenes. A quick look around the sanctuary here at All Saints reveals 4, the ceramic one on top of the piano, the glass one on the pass-through from the kitchen, the larger one under the Christmas tree, and a small nativity scene ornament on the tree itself. The cloth under the font is almost, but not quite, a 5th scene. We see the angel, the star, and the shepherds, and a silhouette of Bethlehem. On display in my office is a nativity scene from Guatemala, carved from reclaimed wood. We have several nativity scenes on display at home as well, including some that are carved from stone and one with straw and wooden figures inside a woven box from various countries in Africa, and one carved from cedar, which comes from Palestine. You may have seen a picture of another Palestinian nativity scene making the rounds on social media this year. Bethlehem Lutheran Church, located in the West Bank, has a different sort of nativity scene on display outside their church. The figures of Mary and Joseph are in the back, and the 3 wise men are off to the side. In the middle is a pile of rubble. A doll lies on the rubble, wrapped in a keffiyeh, the traditional headdress which represents Palestinian identity and history. The debris represents the destruction in Gaza, and the doll, meant to be Jesus, represents the thousands of children buried beneath the rubble in Gaza. If you haven't seen it anywhere, I encourage you to search for it online. It is a striking image and a reminder in the midst of the war between Israel and Hamas that, like so many things in our world, this conflict is more nuanced than simply a conflict between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Muslims. In both Israel and Palestine, there are Jews, Muslims, and even Christians who live and work side by side, whose lives are disrupted, many of whom long for peace. This is a longing that our text this morning speaks to. The past few weeks, we've read from the prophets foretelling the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of the people from Israel and Judah at the hands of the Babylonian army. In these verses, from the beginning of Isaiah chapter 40, the mission of the prophet is to demonstrate God's desire to provide care and healing for the people in exile in Babylon. This is the worst time that God's people have experienced. They've been defeated. Now, it's important to understand that we've not gone directly from the events of the siege of Jerusalem, our text for last week, to this week's Isaiah's text. One of the confusing things is that there were at least 2, probably 3 prophets whose work is gathered together in the book of Isaiah. If you were to flip back to chapter 39, you would discover Isaiah prophesying to Hezekiah, a king who lived about 125 years before the fall of Jerusalem. Then you turn to chapter 40, and all of a sudden, here we are, reading about people who have been in exile for some time now, long enough for Jerusalem's time of penance to have ended. The people have served their time, and God is ready to call them back to the land. I want to dwell in this for just a little bit because it's easy to gloss over this part of the story. It's easy to hear these words and think of that really beautiful oratorio from Handel's Messiah where the tenor sings, comfort ye, my people, saith our God." Who is it that needs a word of comfort? People who are suffering. And what have they suffered? They've lost their nation. Jerusalem, the religious and political center, has been utterly destroyed and will not be rebuilt until 150 years after its destruction. Estimates are that between death and exile, the population of Judah is reduced to 10% of what it had been. Roughly 20,000 people are forced into exile. traveling from Jerusalem to in or near the city of Babylon, near modern-day Baghdad, a journey of nearly 650 miles. Traveling on foot, it would take between 3 and 4 weeks to make that journey. Can you imagine? If you're forced to travel 650 miles to a new home where you will not speak the language, where you know you will be a second-class citizen at best, at worst a slave, and that's if you manage to survive the journey. How many families do you imagine managed to stay together? How many people had enough to eat on the journey? How many people suffered injuries or illnesses on the way? Unfortunately, we still witness this level of trauma and suffering today. People are forced to leave their homes and try to find safety from violent regimes, only to be housed in a refugee camp, sometimes for years or even decades, if permanent solutions can't be found. Refugee camps exist in Asia, Africa, and even in Mexico, across the border from the U.S. And so, to the people who are suffering these multiple, deep wounds of loss of country, loss of identity, loss of home and language, and perhaps even loss of family, the prophet offers a word of comfort, a bold voice calling for the people to return home, but not to a landscape filled with rubble and destruction. The people are lost in the wilderness, and God offers a lifeline. God speaks a new creation into existence in which the exiles can return home in peace and safety. All of the challenges which seem too big to overcome will be made smaller, and the people will be lifted out of the depths of suffering. Even the rubble will be cleared, making a straight path for the people to return, when the glory of God will be revealed for all to see. Yes, but, we say from the vantage point of hindsight. We know that the people will return to Judah, only to be conquered again by the Greeks and then the Romans. We know that even if Hamas and the Israeli government manage to make a ceasefire last, something will happen in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, and the violence will erupt again. We know that even if we manage to untangle our own complicated national relationship with refugees and immigrants, the pendulum will continue to swing, and some new bias or fear will arise to snarl things up. This is how it works for human beings. We long for peace. We work for peace, but we do not sustain peace. So when God commands us to cry out, so often our answer is, what will I say? What can I say that will make a difference? To whom am I called today to offer comfort, and why is that comfort needed? We recognize the fragility of the things we build. Even when we manage to carve out a little bit of comfort, a short time of peace, we know we can't take it for granted. We know it won't last in a broken world. Even those of us who are not refugees know this reality. We learned that with the financial crisis of 2008, and again when the world shut down in 2020. And so in the bad times, we cling to the memories of moments of peace, and we hope for the next moment of peace that will come to us. In a broken world, this is the reality that we face. And the prophet knows this and gives us words of comfort. How the people are like grass. Grass withers and flowers wilt, but the promise of our God will stand forever. Sometimes the road is smooth and the path is straight through the wilderness, and we can see our destination clearly. Other times we are exposed to the elements on the mountaintops or facing the danger of the valleys, but God is always with us. And this is the promise of the gospel, that we are never alone. Because in just a few weeks, we will remember the birth of a baby whose coming changed the world, bringing with him a new way of understanding God with us and a reimagined way of being a supportive and helpful community of believers. A new way to find peace in the world, a peace that passes all understanding. That's the peace that we glimpse when we prepare our hearts and minds for the birth of Jesus. That's the peace that we feel when we share God's peace with each other during worship. That's the peace that we hear when God's promise of comfort is spoken to us. That's the peace that we taste when we are invited to Jesus' table. That's the peace that we want to share with others. We rest in God's strong arms, knowing that under God's rule we are cared for, we are comforted, we find peace. Amen.